Good evening, my friends, and welcome to this session on the National Education Policy 2020 of India and its effect or likely effect on our children and on our institutions, schools and colleges. Let's bow our heads a moment in prayer, asking for God's Spirit to inspire us, to enlighten our minds, to give us wisdom and understanding. Almighty God, we know that without you, our intellects often miss the point. Our intellects are not in a position to grasp the wider meaning and the deeper meaning of things. And it's your Spirit who guides us, who enlightens our minds, guides our thinking, and helps us to reach wisdom and understanding. We ask that your Spirit may now be with us during these 45 minutes of our session, trying to understand something so important for Indian society, India's education. That our educational system may value our children as our precious gifts from you, and that our system may also cater to all the wonderful talents and capacities that you have put in each one of us as human beings, so that we may grow as integral persons. Thank you, Almighty God, for your presence with us and for the gift of your Spirit. My friends, you see this session on the national education policy is being held in church. Isn't that politics? Well, the social teachings of the church for many years, in fact centuries, teach us that the church and the Gospels have a lot to say on the integral development of the human person. And so anything that concerns the integral development of the child and of every human being is an important aspect that we need to reflect on in the light of Scripture and in the light of the inspiration of God's Spirit. And so, when we take up an issue like this, which has such a wide impact on our children and on our society, we are doing what the Gospels warrant. I'm told that many feel that the latest encyclical of the Pope is also very political. Yes, it deals with issues of policy making which are very important to the well-being of all human beings. And political decision making, or rather decision making, is political. However, what we don't do is enter into party politics, either accepting or rejecting any political dispensation. We concentrate on the issue that impacts our society. We concentrate on the policies and on the decisions. And that's what democracy is all about. It's about reflecting on what the government proposes and giving a feedback. And so, my friends, while I try to explain some of the possible consequences of the national education policy in this session, I also request you to reflect, first of all, to read the policy. It's a rather long, 66 pages, but it's worth reading because it will have a major impact on our society. Also, there have been many very good webinars which are still available online, which you can view and then make up your minds. I'm told that a recent webinar talked about all the good points of the of the policy. And at every point it was provided this happens, provided that happens. I think that's really the point at discussion. The provided is something that needs to be investigated into. Is there a possibility of this utopia happening, of these good things happening? That's what we are doing when we try to evaluate a policy of this type. And so, my friends, let me straight away go into an analysis of the National Education Policy 2020. Do we need a new education policy? Yes, we do need them. In fact, times are changing, needs differ, and educational technology also changes. And so, congratulations to successive governments that have been making changes in our educational system and policy. The latest was the Right to Education Act. And that, of course, meant, after a long period of preparation, a great boost to our system. I do invite questions and comments in the chat, which I think some of you are already participating in. Towards the end of the session, I will try to respond to some of these questions, because my colleague, Father Gerard, is going to be collating them, and we'll try to address the issues that you bring forth. So, the new education policy is something that we need, but it needs evaluation because it concerns the future of our children, our grandchildren, and I bet most of us have not read the 66 pages. But should we? Leave it in the hands of the government. They know better. Well, that's not a democratic attitude. The attitude that we should all have is one of willing participation. And that's what the government is also requesting or suggesting. There are still online portals where you can respond. Different stakeholders are being asked to respond. And so this is a process that I think is very important. It's not a democracy if we don't participate. It's not responsible citizenship. And so here goes an analysis of the NEP 2020. The NEP rightly starts with the UN SDG 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has set for all humanity. And this goal is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. Every word is important. And our policy starts with that. The policy also uses very beautiful language to describe the principles and processes and goals of education. But the conclusion it reaches is very difficult for many educationists to accept. Educationists like Professor Anita Rampal, Shyam Menon, A.R. Vasavi, and a host of others, they have very serious reservations. The policy says such a lofty goal as the SDG of the UN will require the entire education system to be reconfigured to support and to foster learning. Entire education system reconfigured. It's almost as if this policy and the drafters want a clean slate, wipe out all that has gone before and come up with something really new. It therefore does not acknowledge the journey we've been through already leading up to the RTE, the Right to Education Act, which is now part of our Constitution. It therefore proposes disturbing solutions, my friends. These are the points I would like you to reflect on. Let us start straight away with the first. While an education policy of this type is being drafted, don't you think Christian educators should be involved in the exercise? Because Christian educational institutions are among the most sought after and highly rated in the country, even by government agencies. And yet, not a single Christian educator was involved in any of those different stages of the actual drafting of the NEP. Therefore, it looks like there has been a deliberate exclusion. There is no mention of minority educational rights at all in the document, whereas the Constitution has Article 30, on the basis of which our schools and colleges function, both linguistic and religious minorities. And you know that educational institutions of the minorities encourage plurality, encourage the ethos, the well-being of that group, that minority group, so that the rich tapestry of Indian society is catered to. And so, besides, of course, encouraging plurality, Christian educational institutions have given quality education to a wide spectrum of Indian society, all the different components, religious and linguistic. That's why they are highly rated. You see, in most of our schools and colleges, you have all the top officials, even of government and of industry. If today they don't send them abroad, their children, they are in our institutions. Very clear. And so, to not have minority rights, that does sound rather disturbing. Thirdly, under the constitutional values, there is no mention of secularism in this NEP. One of the pillars of the Constitution is secularism, and the fact that the word secularism, the whole concept of secularism has been removed, this is disturbing given the talk of Hindutva by many different groups in the country, including from the ruling dispensation, or specially from it. Is secularism something we have now decided to remove? Parallel to removing constitutional guarantees to the minorities, the reservations for the SCs and STs, the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, also do not find mention. In other words, Dalits and tribals will fall out of the system. The system of positive discrimination or affirmative action is really meant to make sure that these historically deprived sections are also included, and education is so important. And if these provisions have been excluded now from the NEP, that's disturbing. Also, there's a clear diluting of the RTE, the Right to Education Act, embedded in our Constitution. And so, after a long struggle to improve the quality of Indian education and make it a fundamental right, to dilute that is really very distressing. And finally, encroaching on the domain of the states, because education is in the concurrent list. And so much of this document of the NEP encroaches on the rights of the states to decide their own educational system, while keeping to very broad frameworks from the center. Now we know, my friends, these are all constitutional requirements. And we know that the Supreme Court had guaranteed that the basic character of the Constitution cannot be changed. That's the nature of the Constitution. Cannot change the basic character. There are a number of Supreme Court judgments. The NEP is clearly indicating an intention to change the constitution in major ways. I've given you 5 ways just now in which the NEP does indicate a desire and an intent to change. Otherwise, these provisions that I mentioned will be ultra vires of the constitution. They'll be struck down by courts. And so obviously this has been taken into consideration in the drafting, and the follow-up of also amending the constitution will most likely happen. Now, it's therefore not just an educational system that is being changed. Our very constitution, the constitution that we have valued and we have been trying to implement incrementally, that now is going to possibly take a beating. And so this is the major first point that the document, study of the document brings out, and we have to all be concerned about that if we would want our constitution preserved. Secondly, not content with going so far in its radical changes, the NEP has decided also to remove the present governing structure of all institutions. Every institution has a governing board, a group that has built up that institution over the years, not just the infrastructure, but the whole quality of teaching, learning, the whole ethos. Now, this structure, this management group has been sidelined. And this will impact especially minority institutions like St. Stanislaus, which we run on our campus here. The present management will have no role in the management of its own school or college. Institutions with their infrastructure and excellent work culture have been built up and maintained over decades. But now, a school complex management committee, point 7.7 of the document, says a school complex management committee will run the institutions. The Department of School Education, through its relevant officials, will endorse and confirm the school complex development plan of each school complex. So it's gone into government hands. Government appointees will actually run schools like St. Joseph's, Girls High School, St. Stanislaus, and all the other institutions that you are familiar with. In higher education, something similar. 19.2 says, a board of governors shall be established. There shall be overarching legislation that will supersede any contravening provisions of earlier legislation, and would provide for constitution, appointment, modalities of functioning, roles and responsibilities of the Board of Governors. So even educational institutions like the colleges and the universities will be under government-run bodies. This therefore is like the state, the government, taking over all educational institutions. We know what happens when the state takes over institutions. Government-appointed people with no experience of managing education will now run the schools and colleges, including all the aided institutions run by minority groups like the Christians, which are a very major force in education in our country. This, therefore, is a most damaging provision in the National Education Policy 2020. I have discussed this with some of the drafters, and they say that, one of those components of that group of the managing committee has been mentioned as other stakeholders. So you'll be included in that. In other words, the group that is running the institution with such quality and with great standard of education now will be relegated to perhaps one of the other stakeholders. Now, is this something acceptable or is it desirable? That's the question that we have before us, posed by the national education policy. A third problem of great concern, and that is a sharing of resources. 7.9 says human resources, learning resources, infrastructure will be shared. A school that is better equipped will have to share. Pairing of schools or twinning, one private and one public school, is mandated. However, sharing of teachers and infrastructure will cripple even the good schools that are there. You cannot share to an unlimited extent. All our schools share their infrastructure and a lot of their learning resources. For example, the grounds here of St. Stanislaus, we have about 8 to 10 schools coming every year for their sports day. And some come to use the auditorium and others use other types of resources that we have. Sharing is not the point. The point is, to what extent is the sharing done? Can teachers, for example, be picked up from a good school and put in a school that is poor? Will our teachers be ready for that, first of all? But even if they are, will they be able to function in the same level as they are in the present school? Because here an ethos has been built up. There is infrastructure. There is a whole work culture which will not be found in the other school. A teacher is not a robo or a machine that can be picked up from one place and taken there and now you function. That's unfortunately what the NEP is suggesting. And this is especially so if the governing board of the school is not controlled by the school's own trustees. And therefore, isn't this a refusal to build the necessary infrastructure needed for all? The Right to Education Act said, in fact committed, that educational infrastructure and resources will be built up for all. Now whatever good is there is going to be diluted and shared. And so it's going to be something that will lead to a major deterioration even in the standards that we have already reached in many institutions. Therefore, this is something that all of us once again need to be concerned about, because in the way the sharing of resources, including human resources, is being envisaged, we would have really a deterioration of the type of quality education that we have in some places. Fourth point, and this is a major point once again, the introduction of Samajik Chetana Kendras in the school campus. This is what is being not just proposed, has been decided. Wouldn't these be ideology based, controlled by the government of the day? So are we politicizing our school campuses and our college campuses? 21.6 says, a key initiative in this direction will be to use schools, school complexes after school hours and on weekends for all sorts of things like adult education, for community engagement and enrichment activities. Therefore, the management of the school will have no control over the campus anymore. A politicization of the school campus will obviously result. And that is really the death of good education. Politics introduced into a school, and by politics I would understand, as I mentioned earlier, party politics. There will be a conflict of different ideologies because political parties will have representation now in school campuses. And this therefore is something to be again worried about, because it will impact on the quality. My fifth major point of concern is the emphasis on digital learning, technological solutions, open schools, and vocational exits. All through the document, you have this digital learning, technological solutions, open schools, vocational exits. Now, we all know that digital education, technological solutions are something we have to incorporate in our teaching learning. There's no problem about that. In fact, most of our classrooms, for example, here at St. Stanislaus and in most good schools are already with smart boards and technology. That's already there. But that is as an assist, as something extra. That is not replacing the direct contact with the teacher in class. Now here, open schools and vocational exits will leave the girl child, because girls are not given importance to in Indian society, even till now. We know that. The socially and economically disadvantaged, the differently abled, minority community students, all these will be left without the opportunity of a quality education. Take 3.5 in the document. They are talking of formal and non-formal modes of education. And they mention open and distance learning will be also one of the possibilities. State open schools will be instituted. We have the NIOS, and that is for a certain category of students in the higher classes to pass an SSC exam. But these open schools will also have grades for the 3rd, the 5th, and the 8th standard. Can you imagine a child in the 3rd, 2nd, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd going through an open school? Is that quality education? 3rd, 5th, 8th. At that level, are children going to be only exposed to open schools, to material being sent, to distance learning, and then an exam? And therefore, you can see that quality education is not a commitment here. A lot of options have been left open. For a document of this type to leave such options open is really very distressing, because interacting with peers in a stimulating, healthy environment of an educational campus is obviously one of the core activities of education. And you cannot have it exclusively online or through distance learning or open schools. The 6th point I have is the centralization of creation of content right from the pre-primary. Even from ages 1 to 3 they talk about, but from age 3 till age 12, or till class 12 rather. This bodes ill for quality and for addressing local needs and conditions. These are not just model curricula. These are going to be stipulated as something that schools across the country will have to conform to. Yes, they are saying local flavor can be added, but the content will basically be something that is centralized. It's decided upon centrally. The responsibility, for example, of the ECC curriculum and pedagogy will lie with MHRD, the MHRD or the Education Department at the center. The NEP pushes for national textbooks with local content and flavor. 4.31 gives you that. And so centralization also of school assessment through the National Assessment Survey is on the cards. While the right to education had said no evaluation till the 8th standard. Now here we have 3rd, 5th, and 8th. Imagine we are regressing from the from the Right to Education Act. The National Testing Agency will serve as a premier expert autonomous testing organization to conduct entrance examinations for for undergraduate and graduate admissions. So college admissions from all over the country will be now through a central examination. I can't imagine the scale that this is being attempted at, and what is the purpose for that. Also, the teacher entrance test for every level of teachers will be mandated. That's a central test. Even recruitment of students, as I've said, at the college level will be centralized. And so such centralization goes against the quality of education and the rights of the states. My seventh point is a very important point, my friends, because this deals with that whole reconfiguration that was talked about at the beginning. The seventh point is that the major changes in stages of education will require massive infrastructure building and recruitment of staff. It is unnecessary to have so many changes in the stages. To have such a lot of change will bring a great deal of disruption. Forcing children, for example, to formal school from the age of 3 is unfortunate. Yes, the UN does say that pre-primary education can be from age 3 till the age 8. And that is because some countries have already started with pre-primary at the age of 3. And others have started from the age of 7. Till the age of 7, there is no formal education. Now this, therefore, is being taken into consideration. In India, we have only Balwadis and Anganwadis, which are run not by the education department. And so you can see, therefore, by incorporating them into the educational system, it means a massive building up of infrastructure. However, this is not going to be possible because, as my last point will make, the type of funding that we require for this and the type of educational resources are not available with us even over the long run of 10 or 20 years. We have also the introduction, for example, of the 4-year bachelor's degree, even after a fiasco of the Delhi University, which experimented with it and had to retract. The 4-year degree is good only for those students who want to go abroad for a master's, because abroad, in many countries, you have 16 years of schooling required for the master's, whereas we have 15 with a 3-year degree. But to put all, when only 1% of our students do go abroad, to put all these students, all the rest of the students to a 4-year degree is not really something that is desirable. There is very little justification for such structural changes which will cause massive disruption. And so let me end with this last point. Funding remains a major point, a problem. The very government which reduced spending on education to 2.7% of the GDP. And where did I get this figure? From the draft NEP. So the government itself is telling us that in the previous years, 2.7% of the GDP was spent on education from the previous 4%. Now they are talking about 6%. But our governments, especially in the pandemic now, but even before, have shown scant resources available for anything like education and for health. And today we know that even the state's share of the GST has come into question. And so how will we be able to fund even the minimum needed for these major changes? If you'd like to give importance, for example, as the document says, to pre-primary, concentrate on that. Everything else now has been also changed, and there is very little likelihood of something good emerging. And so, counting on philanthropy, which is very strongly mentioned in the document, is like asking for the moon. We know what philanthropy has done to the educational system. It has commercialized it, and it has made it not only unaffordable, but of very poor quality. So this is a stimulus for further privatization of education. These, therefore, my friends, are 8 major points. There are quite a few others too. But the NEP is not just trying to reform education, as I've tried to show. It is trying to create a whole new type of uniform society. That's why the centralization of all types of things, including content. And this uniform society is to be dictated by the center. Is homogeneity of culture something that we find desirable? On the contrary, the strength of our culture and our society is its plurality. Is the fact that it's made up of different strands which we have been trying to integrate and have made with some success, excepting for the last few years a very great religious conflict that has emerged. And so, my friends, the National Education Policy 2020 leaves us very disturbed and disappointed. There are so many things that could have been done educationally if education had been really at the forefront. But what does look like is that there is another agenda. I would request you, therefore, to spend time in reflecting over the points that I've made and other points that I'm sure will occur to you if you read the document or if you look at and if you watch the different types of webinars that are available. We can give you some suggestions, but what is really important is that we engage with this. At the moment, the government at the state level is coming up with its own program of implementation of the NEP, and there's a lot that is possible if we represent. And so I do think that this is our time to wake up, this is our time to participate, to reflect first, and then to participate and to make sure that the type of education that is being proposed is something that we will be all comfortable with and that will bring about the good of our children and of society ahead. Thank you for listening thus far. I have now a few questions which Father Gerard has taken from the chat. I can see, in fact, the chat has many different questions. I'm sorry I might not be able to answer all of them in this session. We have another 7 or 8 minutes, although I might go a little beyond that for those of you who persevere. But let me answer the ones that have been presented with. How will teachers be trained for NEP? Well, at least for the pre-primary, they have a fantastic training program. Can you imagine that they are saying the pre-primary Anganwadi and Balwadi teachers will be put through a 6-month online course in service while they are teaching through their mobiles. That's the type of pre-primary training that is being suggested, at least in the short run. Can a teacher be able to pick up the skills that are necessary for pre-primary? You know that these are very delicate resources. Children at that level are really exceedingly sensitive, and we need to deal with them at that level. Can they pick up with a 6-month course on their mobiles? That's what the NEP is talking about. But of course, in the longer run, they are talking about a 4-year course of training for teachers. And that too is problematic, because the NEP does say that specialization is something that is the bane of our present system. Children are made to specialize at too early an age. At the moment now, for teacher training, you have to opt for that after graduation. What has the NEP done? It has instituted a 4-year course, and at the 12th standard, after the 12th standard, students will have to opt for education, the 4-year course of education, and be stuck in that. Now you can imagine how a 4-year course integrated with either science education or arts education will work out at such a young age. Whereas the present system of a good graduation in the subject of your choice and then a 2-year training in educational pedagogy using all the content that you have already picked up. That's the type of system of training for our teachers that we have just built up. That's being wiped away. Does the NEP also apply to private non-aided schools? We are not so sure about that. That has been left, a little bit in the dark. They are very clearly saying any private aided school becomes a public school. But they have not mentioned very clearly whether private schools which are not aided will also fall under this. However, I mentioned to you the twinning, and they talked about the twinning of a private school and a public school. So in other words, private schools will also be roped in, perhaps into the school complex. That's not very clear, and that's where we have some leeway to make sure that our state does not opt for a system that will include every educational institution and bring the whole standard down. Next question, what concrete steps can we take to resist or change NEP now, especially these discrepancies? Well, as I said, we have 2 committees appointed by the Maharashtra government. Unfortunately, in spite of so many educational institutions in Mumbai and in the state being Christian educational institutions, top schools, these have not been taken into the committee. You have the committees formed for higher education and for school, and they are deliberating at the moment, but we don't have representation there. However, we can represent to those communities, and that's perhaps what we should be doing right now. There's very little time. I'm not too clear when the report of those committees is to be presented, but it's in the near future. And that's the reason why we need to represent. These are the concrete steps that we can take. Represent at all the levels. If we reach out to our corporator, to the MLA, and to the MP of our zones, of our area, if we reach out to different government officials, we will have a democratic participation in this process. If the government cannot maintain higher education in existing institutions, how will it manage with the NEP? That's the point that I'm making. When a government takes over an institution, you do realize that it comes up with problems immediately. So many things like, for example, the passport. If you want to apply for a passport, you had to go to a government office. Now the governments realize it cannot manage even a simple thing like this, issuing of passports. What has it done? It has privatized it. It does monitor, I presume, but the system of getting a passport now is so wonderful, I'm told. I haven't applied, but I'm told that it's a simple system because it is now in the hands of a private party and it is well run. So if the government cannot maintain what it is already running, in fact all those big industries, etc., it is now privatizing, but it wants to take over something so crucial as education. That does not meet with any standard of logic. Is the NEP trying to silence secular education? Well, unfortunately, that is the fear, because with the content coming from the center and the center having its own political ideology, as we very well know, we would have content which they are claiming will be Indian content. That bringing in some Indian content is something perhaps quite clearly beneficial. But if it is going to be Indian content of the type that even our Prime Minister talked of, plastic surgery in the Vedic times and other types of such statements, if that's the type of Indian content that's going to be brought in, then really we are in trouble. Can you highlight some positive elements of the NEP? Well, you know, a positive element that I would have picked up, and I mentioned this in my presentation, is the concentration at the lower levels of the children, at the pre-primary, the foundational stages, as you say, and primary, because that's where the basis is laid. And that's where such a large section of our population falls through, because you don't get quality education there. Now, I was pointing out that if this education policy had concentrated, put all its eggs into that basket, we would have had a fantastic foundation built up. But the way it has gone about doing it, talking even about, you know, distance education for pre-primary and for primary, I don't think there is any possibility of something positive coming from that. And that's the sad part. So there are positive points, but it is really not worth talking about the positive small points, because the whole force of the NEP is going to be disastrous. That's unfortunately the fear. The church upset with the NEP because it will lose control. Well, the church losing control is not the point. The point is the church and most of our educational institutions are giving excellent education. Handing it over to the government, is that something that you would approve of, that you would think is advisable? Because the church, and let me take St. Stanislaus and St. Xavier's College that I have been associated with. We have had not just a few years, not even decades. It is really more than a century of educational tradition that has been built up. Now, if you think that handing all over this to government forces is something good, then you must support the NEP. I agree. Is there a political plan to take over our institutions? Well, I really don't know about that, but I've mentioned how the educational content and pedagogy is something that will suffer. And therefore, the political plan is not something that I would want to give an opinion on. My last question here, I think I've taken all the others. How can we take this webinar further? Do you have any plans? Well, this session is really to get you interested in the NEP, because it's not people like me who will come up with solutions. It's people like you. I think you have the resources, you have the imagination of what can be done. And we'd like to hear that. That's the reason here, right here in church, we are having this session. This is a session about integral human development and using all the values that we have learned from the Gospels, from our scriptures. We would like an educational policy that will really develop the integral human being and give inclusive quality education as that goal said. But the types of provisions that the NEP comes up with, and I've given you specific points in the NEP, they're all numbered. These are troubling. These are things that we feel need to be changed. And there are people, in fact, large groups who are saying the whole NEP needs to be redrafted. I do think that that stage is over, but really I wouldn't know that. What we do have available is the implementation in each state, and the fact that we need to democratically participate in what's happening at our state level and each state level, so that we have a voice and we can ensure that quality and inclusion that we so desire. I think one last one has come up. Father Gerard thinks it is important, and so let me take that up, although I've taken you beyond by 5 minutes. Has the church any write-up which can be taken up with our MP, MLAs? Yes, if you look at the Indian Currents and the Examiner, you will find an article written by me, but many other articles which are expounding these very ideas that have been mentioned here. The Indian Currents has got a whole issue. I have written in another issue subsequent to that one. The Examiner has also got several articles on that, and I'm sure you will be able to find those as resources. So my friends, thank you for your participation, especially for all these questions. Thanks to Tony Coelho for waiting much beyond the normal time to keep this live streaming on, and to Father Gerard, who did this crucial job of being your voice. Let's once again bow our heads in prayer and ask God for guidance in how to take this forward. Almighty God, we thank you for bringing us together through this online medium technology, and we ask that you help us to interact with one another, and especially with those in our state, in each state, who have the authority of decision making, so that they can take our concerns and our ideas also into consideration for the common good of our society and our children. Thank you, Almighty God. Thank you and good night. God bless.